I have a few colleagues at work that they know exactly how wine should be made. And they told me that the way we make wine is the wrong way. And that's how the AWRI was born.
Really?
We just, it's all of a sudden.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. In this episode, I'm talking with Alex Shulkin, wine scientist for the Australian Wine Research Institute and half of the husband and wife team behind The AWRI, based in Ashton in the Adelaide Hills. Alex was born in St. Petersburg, Russia and moved to Israel at 12 years old, eventually earning a degree in biophysics. After a trip to Australia 20 years later to explore wine study options, his daring wife pushed them to move their young family over to Australia. It was here Alex had his mind expanded and at one stage was destined to be the brewer for the natural selection theory. From these beginnings, he's become possibly the only wine scientist in the world to make natural wine. As always, you can find show notes, links and more at our website, realwinepeople.com. But for now, please enjoy this conversation with Alex Shulkin. Well, now this is... So if you want to sound like a Pixie or Barry White or anything, just...
I want to sound like the Pixies.
Oh, the Pixies. We all want to sound like the Pixies. So, quick... Just get my beer. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, dude.
I'm here with Alex in the Basket... It's not the Basket Range, is it?
This is Ashton.
Ashton. I know nothing. I've been driving around in circles all day.
It's pretty close to Basket Range.
Right. Alex Shulkin of the AWRI wines and his cool... shed that used to be a big engineering, like a agricultural engineering company?
Yeah, workshop.
Workshop, yep. Yeah. So it's pretty cool sitting here on a Friday afternoon. And I've just recently learned that Alex is from St. Petersburg in Russia via Israel and working for the AWRI, doing all sorts of crazy research that I want to get all the info on, and makes beautiful wine under the AWRI.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good to be here, mate. Good to see you again.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. So, mate, start from the beginning. Born in Russia?
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Do you remember any of it? Like, how old were you when you left?
12. I remember everything.
Right.
So, it was an interesting time.
Sure.
I do remember I was stoked to get out of the Soviet Union back then.
Yes, okay.
I miss the place. There are many things about it I don't miss, but I certainly miss the place, and I go there quite regularly.
Oh, really? Cool.
But
lots
like
of family?
Once a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, my grandma still lives there. She's 97.
Wow, that's good.
So yeah, I go there once a year to hang out. Recently, the whole natural wine scene in St. Petersburg and in general in Russia picked up hugely. And whenever I go there, I hang out with the locals who really appreciate what we do.
Cool.
It's too hard for us to export wine there. It's too hard for them too because, Europe is around the corner and it's just too much work to get like a layer on the palate.
Sure. Like you just put it in a car.
From Australia, yeah. So, but I'm surprised to find our wine there that people bring in suitcase from wherever they find it in the world.
Wow.
And then we just catch up and all of a sudden they pull out a bottle and go like, "Did you make it 3 years ago?" It's like, oh my God. All right, let's have a look.
Oh, wow. That's great. And so the scene's exploding. So it's natural wine bars. St. Petersburg is the same as any other major city.
Yeah. And, Moscow is like a lot bigger than
Sure.
that. But that applies. That's the same with everything. When you compare St. Petersburg and Moscow is always bigger.
But St. Petersburg is the same as any major international city.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. I've never been to Russia. I've been really curious to go.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's very interesting, worth visiting.
Yeah.
Now it's not the worst time, so.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah.
Can be worse.
And then you came to Australia via Israel.
Yeah, so I spent 20 years of my life in Israel.
Right. And what ages were that? Was it?
So 12 to, 32.
Yeah.
Pretty much, give or take.
And you studied there as well?
I studied, I did my high school there and then did my uni there, studied biophysics. Then
Wow.
did a few things, few jobs, worked, met my partner. We got married there. We had a daughter there, and when our daughter was 1, we came here with me studying winemaking in mind. So the plan was to be here for a year, and then go back to Israel and make wine, the only wine I knew about, which was, I don't know, probably call it industrial wine these days.
Yes.
Because, nobody told me then there was anything else. But so it happened, the only contact in Australia I had was James Erskine,
Really?
who had studied winemaking, actually viticulture in UC Davis a few years prior to that, with a good friend of mine from Israel, who's now the first Israeli MW.
Whoa. That's crazy.
There was early days when they were all both, in their mid-20s. And so I came here and I gave James a ring, and everything has evolved from there.
Fantastic. So you gave James a ring, and you'd moved the family here. Did you do vintage with James? Is it?
Well, I didn't move the family here per se. We all 3 of us came here for that year for me to study.
Sure.
And us hang out. In fact, Galit, my partner, was probably the main driver of that move. I was just too scared.
Right.
And she's between the 2 of us, she's the person with the vision.
Great.
And
those chicks.
And she was like, don't think twice. Let's do it. Let's go for it.
Wow.
She's very, what do you call it? What's the word for it?
Full of life.
Daring.
Oh, daring. Yes. That sounds like my wife, Naomi. Yeah. Yes. Oh, cool. Okay.
So we were here, and we met James a couple of times, and he'd only started making his wine Jama back then.
Great. And that was 2009?
That was 2009, yeah. And he was making wine at Anton's Shed and Lucy Margot.
Yes.
And he took me there, and I was like, is this winemaking? Why is there mud everywhere?
Yeah.
And why don't you use all that technology we have available for us? And James was like, I don't think we need to. And I thought, well, the wine must be like really bad.
Yeah.
But sure enough, it didn't take long for us to do some tasting, and I was mind blown by what the wines looked like. Not only they weren't bad, they were actually something very different and in a very exciting way. And that's probably how, a natural winemaker was born.
Great. Yes, it's amazing what earlier today I saw Tom and we were chatting about that, and how just from, the Anton, James, Sam, Tom, and how much that has influenced where, the whole industry is moving now. It's crazy.
Absolutely. So they were the 4 of them: Anton, James, Tom, and the late Sam Hughes.
Yes.
And they were the National Selection Theory. And I briefly joined that collective as potentially a brewer.
Sure.
That never happened because I had my sights on making wine. But it was a very exciting time when I just happened to be around people with so much vision. For me, it was absolutely mind blowing. Like every moment in that company that I spent, I was really amazed by what can be done and how it can be done, and how different people's thoughts can be, and their ideas of what can be done.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So how long did it take? So you met James 08? Was that
09?
09. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then how long before you started making your own wine?
Not very long. So as soon as that meeting happened, I wouldn't I wouldn't let it go.
Sure.
So I kept harassing James and telling him, hey, all right, I'm going to just come and give you a hand. He probably didn't need that hand because I was more of a nuisance than anything, but he was very welcoming and supportive. And so was Anton, where I did a few, we'll call it shifts with him.
Sure.
And then made James an offer he couldn't refuse.
Russian style, or
probably that's probably what enabled all that.
Sure.
My background. When I said, "How about I keep?" And back then it probably became more useful because having spent a couple of years working in a winery, well, you get a better idea, so you become more of a help. So I was like, "How about I do like a whole vintage here?"
Yeah.
And you let me make like a couple barrels. And Jim was like, yeah, cool. And one thing followed another. 3 years later, there was 5 tons made in this shed. And then that's where it started feeling like it's time to make a move. And, because there is only that long you can abuse someone's hospitality for. So 2017 was the first year when we started making wine here.
Yeah, right. And so you moved from James's to here.
Yeah,
great.
But it was very welcoming and very generous of James to let me make wine in his shed for 5 years in a row. I don't know if I would be able to do that.
Yeah, sure. Oh, you wouldn't be able to let people here make...
Yeah. Well, I'm getting close now because James Madden has been making wine here for 3 years and counting. But it's, well, I hope that my presence in James's shed worked as well as James Madden's presence works for me.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Great. And so what was the brief play with or dalliance with beer? Like, so what were you doing for natural selection theory then?
I was home brewing because brewing is fun and also it all started when I was a student. I couldn't really afford
That's where it starts.
a lot of beer, and I figured out I can make it at a fraction of a price. But what came as a complete surprise, it turned out to be even like a lot better than what you could buy, and you could make whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
So so the plan for natural selection theory was that we start making beer, but that ran into some bureaucracy hoops, because as opposed to wine, with beer, that's like the licensing is very different and quite annoying.
And the excise.
Yeah, excise, exactly. So that basically, that killed it in the crib, basically. So that never happened, and it tried to be useful in other aspects when we were bottling eggs.
Yes.
With that Hunter Semillon fermented in when the eggs, fermenter eggs were immersed in different soils to express the fermentation surrounding terroir of sorts.
Yeah. Play different music, and Tom was telling me this.
Yeah. I wasn't present at the music,
sure,
but I was totally present with the 4 eggs immersed in different soils.
Great.
There were more. There was the 2 barrels in separate rooms where one barrel got talked to with like words of love.
Yeah.
And the other barrel got sworn at, like really badly. And then upon a session, it turned out that the one that got sworn at turned out to be a lot better.
Wow.
Not that, I don't know what the expectations were anyway.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can't have any expectations.
Yeah, and it's not a controlled experiment. No. It could be just barrel variation. Who knows?
Is that the scientist coming out talking now? Yeah.
Absolutely. You can take me out of the institute, but you can't take the institute out of me.
Yeah, sure. So what sort of stuff do you do at the institute?
The project I'm involved in is wine texture.
Oh, great.
So we are looking at different chemical drivers of wine texture, and different winemaking techniques that lead to presence or absence of those drivers and basically try to put a picture together. Texture as opposed to many other aspects of wine is not as well researched. So for me, it's very exciting to be a part of that project specifically. And I've been doing it for almost 10 years now.
10 years just on texture?
Yeah.
Wow.
And counting.
And so were you hired just for that? Or is that how, I don't understand.
Basically, yeah. So I was hired as like a casual winemaker,
right,
for the institute, but I didn't get to do a single day of winemaking because the things changed.
Sure.
But like it took them like a month to recruit me. Within that month, quite a few things changed there, and the projects evolved. And all of a sudden, we were all there scratching our heads. What am I supposed to do now? But that's where my background in
the biophysics,
yeah. Which in biophysics is really a lot of chemistry and a lot of biology and heaps of physics.
Yeah.
Physics is not as applicable with what I do now, but biology and especially chemistry, big time.
Right.
So, and that combined with my winemaking background and a degree in winemaking, really, well, hopefully provides me with some kind of a vision when it comes to wine chemistry and wine making and perspective in general.
And have you used, so when we're talking about the other right wines that you make here, are you influenced much by the texture work you've done?
Not as much as I would expect, interestingly. If anything, it's probably the other way around.
Really? We want no texture in our wines, yeah.
No, in the sense that my work at the Institute is more influenced by what I do here than the other way around.
Right. Oh, okay, so you're experimenting here and then going to the Institute and replicating and saying, this is what I saw in my cellar, let's do it in a scientific way.
Yeah, but not quite such a direct relationship. It's more like our winemaking over time becomes more and more intuitive.
Yes.
And it could still be based on some kind of reason. But more and more it's based on gut feels and intuition. And at first I found it a bit daunting when I kind of felt like doing something and I couldn't even explain why. But after a few years, many of those decisions had proven like good ones. So they made sense in hindsight.
Yes. Okay.
So I've learned to rely on my intuition more and more, and all of a sudden I find myself in a position of like those old school winemakers that I asked questions 10, 15 years ago and told me, we just do it because that's what feels right. Yeah. And I thought they were wankers. And now I realize they probably weren't.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
So I owe them an apology.
Oh, that's cool. Well, nice. So what would be an example of something that you did with intuition that in hindsight?
Anything.
Yeah.
Any winemaking decisions. When to pick.
When to take it off skins. When
to press. How hard to press. Yeah. Which barrel to use. I used to try and think when I was looking at the grapes in the vineyard. I used to think, I wonder what the pH is, and
sure,
whether we should pick it now based on that. And now I taste and go like, yeah, that doesn't taste ready. Give it another week.
Yeah.
And if and like sometimes I get, we always welcome people here, and it's not rare when there are some people around. They ask me, so why not now? What is that thing that drives your decisions? And I'd say, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It feels like we need to wait a bit longer.
Well, so what influence has your winemaking? So let's say if we're talking about a picking decision. So going down a bit of a rabbit hole here. So let's say you're talking about a picking decision. You go out there and it doesn't quite taste right. Are you still checking like pH and sugars and
No.
nothing?
I do check sugars.
Sure.
Well, sugar, just a refractometer. I just have a look at what it is, because one thing that will affect my decisions, except my gut feel, is if the sugar gets too high, because we've been trying to make wine with lower alcohol content for years, purely because that's how we enjoy it more. So if it starts going into the zone of 13 or 14 or God forbid 15%, then we'll probably pick and deal with it. So say if the flavor is not there, or I think it's not, tannin is not ripe enough, we'll just try and do something to make up for that.
Yeah, we're similar. The one thing we do watch though is we watch acid very, very carefully, because are you dealing with the same vineyards?
Ideally,
sure.
The list is ever evolving, because, we had to part ways with a couple of vineyards recently, because from organic practices they went off that kind of thing, just because they got purchased by another different new owner, and the new owner wasn't into it at all, it's beyond me why, but I can't control what I don't own. So we had to find other vineyards, which we did. But generally, of course, the idea would be to work with the same vineyards year in, year out, because that's the only way for us to get our head around what we're doing and how to do it best.
Yeah, the reason I asked was because we have a new vineyard now. I think we've been making for 5 years from it, and it's only now that I'm starting to work out what works and what doesn't. I mean, we do lots of... we have converted it from conventional to organic as well, so that the vineyard itself is changing. But we look at acids very, very closely, because we do want the balance in the wine, and we almost flavour. Flavour is obviously the most important, but in a way, it's a balance between those two. And the sugar we check, but it's just more of a rough reference point of where it's sort of at compared to the year before. But the biggest issue we worry about is, just because we're not adding acid or correcting, of course, is just the spoilage potential, especially in red wines, that we're having, because
and how fun is that? You'd think that white wines are more vulnerable, right? And somehow red wines seem to be a bit more finicky.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's the food in there from all the tannins, or...
Could be.
Yeah, I mean, we are picking it slightly higher pH.
It probably is. Yeah. That's probably the answer. And generally, it's a generalization, but red wine is probably on average higher in pH.
Yes.
So less acidity.
And more exposed, it's on skins for longer.
But I think the nutrients it's again, I don't know that, but I'm guessing that's nutrients.
I think the AWRI should investigate that.
I think so. We're working on it.
Yeah, nice.
One day we'll get there.
Yeah. Because we've had, where we haven't watched that carefully, and I've caught things too late. Like in 2012, we didn't release any wines. Oh, sorry. We didn't release 2 red wines because I think the pHs were close to 4.
We've released so many wines with pH 4, you wouldn't believe it.
Oh, but what happened in the barrel, then they got, Brettanomyces got in. There was just thing.
But that's not a pH. Brett is not a pH thing.
It's not. No, it's not. But Brett can help protect
pH.
Put the pH into a level that it makes it less attractive for something like that to survive. But
Brett is yeast, so that it doesn't really that impressed by any pH. Like if Saccharomyces can do it, then Brett can do it.
We also had a little residual sugar in there, and a lot of things went wrong that vintage.
Well, that happened. That's winemaking, really.
Yeah.
But the only incidence of Brett we've had was, I totally attributed to a barrel. We only deal with old wood.
Sure.
And there was that one barrel. There were like 4 barrels from the same vineyard, and one of them got really bready, and I totally attributed it to the barrel. my only concern, and probably not only mine, of like high pH would be more bacterial in terms of like rather than yeast. I'm talking about bacteria.
We have BA as well, yeah.
But yeah, that could be bacterial for sure. But bacteria are the ones that are really sensitive to pH. So for them, pH 3 would be like they just wouldn't exist, and
Sure.
pH 4 they would have a party. Whereas with bread, pH 4 it would be just slightly happier than it would be at pH 3. Yeah, but in bacteria probably, well, when bread's there, you know it, especially when it's there to the extent that you're not happy with. If it's there but it does nothing, then you don't know, you don't care, right?
Yeah, that's it.
But my theory is that we have bread in like cells in every single one, but
yes,
the environment is not, perfect for them to start expressing themselves. In which case, it doesn't work for bread, but it works for us.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand. Yeah, that's right. And then, with that whole the acid and with the new vineyard, we haven't had that instance since we've been watching. We're obviously watching acids, but I think just watching a lot closer, when you lose an entire vintage red, you tend to get a lot tighter on a lot of different
I can
things.
see how that could freak one out.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, across the board. So I'm just going to... How's your beer?
It's going well.
Cool.
It's
So Friday night. So how many different wines would you make now with the AWRI, with your brand?
So it would average 10 to 12. That it would average 11.
Okay, nice.
But it would range between 10 and 12 as a result.
Because of
a
experimentation, or
because every year is different, and sometimes there is another vineyard that all of a sudden we pick up a new one, or sometimes it would be a heavier crop, so it would make a couple more wines from the same vineyard. Or the other way around, there would be like a really light crop, like in 2019, and this will be the first year when we'll consolidate two viogniers from two separate vineyards into one wine, because otherwise there'll be really like nothing to write home about in terms of like a size. So that's why the numbers change. There are a few vineyards that generally we tend to make one wine from one vineyard. And so it's not quite monopole, because there are different more people who take grapes from those vineyards. But from the section that we take the grapes, that would be like, we make wine, blend it together, and the bottle. While as long as it makes sense, as long as it tastes good. If we think it can be done better, then we'll start improvising and blending. But we rarely have to do it.
And so you're dealing with 10 different vineyards, or
10 different blocks. Some of them would come from the same vineyard, but the majority would be pretty much probably 8 different vineyards.
Yeah.
A bit of Pinot from here, a bit of Chardonnay from there, a bit of Shiraz.
And they're all from around the hills?
Except the Shiraz that comes from McLaren Vale, and we've gotten an excellent reason to work with that vineyard. Which is, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's better than awesome. Better than just that. But all the rest is from the hills, from this area pretty much. We like stuff that grows here. We like the varieties that grow here. Like I'm sold on Chardonnay. I don't mind the Pinot. Viognier is very much. I don't know if it's a crowd pleaser. It's also like a crowd pleaser, but it pleases us a lot.
Right. Nice.
And we really enjoy seeing what happens with that. Shiraz is that particular vineyard. If not that vineyard, we wouldn't be making Shiraz. And 2019 was the first year when we got some Pinot Gris, and we are super excited by that. And we'll keep making Gris.
What did you do with the Gris? Is it like your winemaking is very broad? You're doing lots of different.
When I came to think about it, like recently in the last couple of years, and it is very broad.
Right.
So we make a bit of red, a bit of white, a bit of pink, a bit of orange. Some has bubbles, some doesn't. And basically that covers, well,
everything.
We don't make fortified wine, except this year we did.
Right.
Some oxidative, some not oxidative, you name it.
Yeah, great.
Somehow. But we just find it exciting that there are so many options on the table and we can play with it.
Yeah.
And do different things with the grapes and how they turn out.
So when you started, so 2007, 17 you moved here, so a few vintages, so four or so with James.
Yeah, so right? It was 5 actually. So 2012 was the first year when we made 2 barrels of Grenache and 1 barrel of Chardonnay.
So then you bottled that, and then what did you do?
When we bottled it, we still had no name, and it was about this time of year. So it was probably a bit early. It was late October, and we realized that if we want to make wine in 2013, we need to sell what we have right now. So we started brainstorming, and sure enough, it wasn't easy to find a name, to think of something that would make sense. And I have a few colleagues at work that they know exactly how wine should be made. And they told me that the way we make wine is the wrong way. And that's how the AWRI was born.
Really?
We just, all of a sudden, we looked at each other and I said, the AWRI, how does that sound? And we just high-fived and
oh, fantastic.
It was all good. It worked really well because it's also, we have, in our family, we have issues with directions. And and it wouldn't be uncommon to have this conversation. How about where do we turn here? Right. And then 3 seconds later, no, the other right.
Yeah. Yes, I have the same problem. My wife's the navigator usually when we're away, and I can't tell left from right, so she has to point. She goes, go right, and I'm like, and I'll just turn. So
that's what CFS, like the firefighters, that's what they do when they drive. That's like a rule. When we're going to right. Fight a fire,
yep.
They go your side, my side.
Oh, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Naomi, if you're listening. No, it's my fault. So did you have, no, because I love that name. It's awesome. Did you have any other names that almost made it but never did?
Yeah, we had a Russian word for plonk.
Right, what's that?
Barmatucha.
Barmatucha.
Yeah,
right.
You did well.
Oh, yes, been practicing on it. Barmatucha. No, I've forgotten it already.
Barmatucha.
Barmatucha. Oh, cool.
It's like plonk.
Right.
Something that the literal translation is mumbler. It makes you mumble.
Okay.
That's awesome. Bad.
Yeah.
You get drunk and you just mumble.
Well, Evo from C, his second label's called The Source, which is like a name for, or you probably know anyway, like, rough drink or whatever. Just get on the sauce. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, cool. I like that one.
Yeah, and now we have borracho, which is Spanish for the same thing.
Is that what that means?
That's what that means.
I thought it was just, because borracho, I presume, was Italian. Obviously, I was wrong.
It's Spanish.
Right.
Yeah, because Alicia is, she's Spanish origin.
Yeah.
And so for them it was a no-brainer. Borracho makes perfect sense when I think of Alicia and Mark.
Nice, true. So okay, the AWRI was born, and then so you had the Chardonnay and was it the Pinot?
That was Grenache.
Grenache, you did say Grenache, yeah.
Nothing was organic back then, but in 2012. The general idea of natural wine was whatever grapes you get.
Yep.
And then make it with no additives except some sulfurate bottling. And we were almost lucky enough to learn things one step at a time. Because now, if we ever wanted to, we don't call that natural wine. We call it for the convenience because everybody knows what it means. But if we were really into getting stuck into this game, we would, and then we would source a Grenache that not only wasn't organic, it was also machine picked. We would probably have a few eyebrows raised, including our own ones. Yep. But that was the evolution. So we started in 2012, and 2013 we did about the same, except we handpicked the Grenache, which was good idea. And then 2014 we got our hands on the first grapes that were grown organically. 2016 was the big year when we said, all right, that's it. This year we only work with stuff that's been grown organically, and we only use grapes in our line.
Right.
And that was it. And not a lot has changed since, except now there is one vineyard that we work with that is actually certified organic. And I think we will, it's not that we will have to move in that direction. We would like to move in that direction. I think it's the right thing to do, because when I buy wine from Europe, I don't always want or have the means to explore and look up every winemaker and what they do and find. And not always you can even find reliable information on the web or wherever you look. And I want to know that, I want to be certain that the wine is grown, the grapes are grown the way we believe in. And that's where that little logo on the label, plays a role. And I think I'm not the only one who's having those thoughts.
Well, I think you're right. The whole thing's just been an evolution. It's like, what happens if we do this, and what happens if we do that, and let's try this, and it was excitement, and everyone was doing it, and over time it's evolving a certain way.
Yeah.
So 16, you went all organic fruit, and then no sulfur. So using sulfur prior to that, or?
Yeah.
Right.
So until 2012 we used sulfur in every wine, and we used like 70 or 80 parts. Then next year, 13, we used a bit less, and we made one wine with no sulfur at all. Then, and so it evolved. We made fewer and fewer wines with sulfur, and those that we made with sulfur, we used less. And 2016, we bottled everything without sulfur, except there was that Chardonnay that we were yet to bottle. And I was freaking out, because I thought white wine was more vulnerable rather than less. But having bottled everything without sulfur except that wine, I was like, all right, well, let's just cross our fingers and go for it.
Wow.
And we did, and we didn't regret it. And sure enough, and ever since, and now when we bottle wine, I'm more worried about the reds than the whites. With whites, I'm like so relaxed.
That's crazy. So we're not quite there. Well, we're not there. We have a few wines that are no sulfur. We grow our fruit, which is all, organic and etc. But we're doing the reds where we're putting, barrels aside now that are not getting sulfur, because sulfur is the only thing that we do use, and we were the same. I think 2011 we started at 70, and we've just been moving down and down. I think everything now is 50 or under, but usually 40 or 30. But a certain amount we're putting aside with no sulfur, and then we're only selling that though locally, like within the cellar door. I'm being very careful about the whole thing. So what were the biggest? You just did it and everything worked out, or?
Basically, I consider ourselves very lucky, because I know things can go wrong. I have seen things going wrong. Somehow, we've gotten away with all we've done so far. There were a couple of wines that, they were developing a little bit of something weird about them. That like many of them have developed weird things, but most of them I was very happy with.
Right.
But there were a couple that they were like probably a bit suboptimal, but nothing overly serious from what I could tell. So I guess we're lucky. We also try to be thoughtful. I don't know what percentage is luck and what percentage is that thoughtfulness. I'd like to think it doesn't matter what I'd like to think, because we don't know the answer.
Sure. Absolutely. So as you bring all the fruit in here, simple winemaking, you crush it, press it, goes to mostly barrel?
Yeah, all goes into barrel except the pet nats that go into the tank,
Sure.
and then they get bottled straight away.
Yep.
So we don't age anything in stainless. I know it works for many people. I've drunk lots of stuff that came out of stainless and tasted delicious. It somehow doesn't seem to work for us. And it only didn't work like once or twice, and that was enough for me to go like, all right, barrels seem to work better, let's just do that. I like to experiment, but I can't experiment with everything all the time. And in some things, I don't feel obliged to experiment just to find the answer. I'm in a privileged position of asking my own questions and giving my own answers.
Right.
So I'm not really curious to explore the stainless bit at the moment. Yeah, it might change one day, but at the moment, I'm perfectly happy with old wood.
Great. Yeah, that's excellent. So then old wood, and then you'll assemble the wine, to stainless for however long, and then into bottle, all bottled here?
Yeah, and not very long.
Like a day or two, or?
No.
Oh.
Like a minute or two.
Really?
So when we decided on a blend, right? So we have a few barrels sitting around. They're all going into the same tank. So we just rack the barrels into that tank, pop it on picking bins, and gravity feed it in the bottler straight away. We don't let it sit at all because, again, I'm kind of... it's probably a superstition with my thing with stainless, but I don't like it sitting around for too long. And we try and bottle as quickly as we can. Just really compress that process, and we don't look at doing anything it would involve less double handling if we labeled it at the same time and waxed and boxed and everything. But I really want to get the bottling done, and then we can deal with other things. And because the wine's sitting there unprotected of sorts, and so I don't want the first bottle to be very different from the last one.
Yes, okay.
Because we put the same label on them, right? So,
yeah.
That's our way to fight bottle variation. And another thing is our corker has a vacuum attached to it. So the headspace gets evacuated before the cork goes in. And I find that being a very good idea. I don't know if that's, part of our luck or our thoughtfulness, but... That's how we've been doing it for years, and it seems to work for us.
So you have another job with the AWRI, and you're doing this, and then 2012, your first vintage, you've got your name, the other right, and then you realise you have to sell something. Do you get out and sell it yourself? Is that how that started?
Yeah, that's very much how it started. Again, James was kind enough to let me in person at NAS as a brand join him on his sales trip to Sydney in 2012,
right.
late 2012. And that was a start. That's how we got to meet a few people. I don't know, call it a foot in the door. And then next year I went on my own, and 2014 was about the same. And 2015 was the first year when we planned the trips and we realized that we don't really need to travel because we had no wine. By the time, we were about to board the plane, we had no wine left, or at least not all of them, were just a couple or maybe just a very little quantity, so it wasn't worth the travel. So we do want to stay in touch with everyone as much as we can. So we still travel, but now we do more like gigs, events of sorts.
Sure.
So I just came back from Sulphur.
Yep.
That was in Melbourne last weekend, and next weekend I'm going to Sydney, doing a tasting with Where Is Nick in Marrickville, and tasting with Winona in Manly.
Yep.
And a gig with P&V, that's Water Fizzer. So that's all pet nat and sparkling.
Yes.
And then doing a lunch with Pepe's Bondi. There, it's like a beautiful restaurant that they make, Italian food, all plant-based, and in Bondi.
Wow.
I'm certainly looking forward to that lunch.
Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, that's cool. So you sell mainly in Sydney? Do you sell in Melbourne? And,
We
well, I
sell,
guess we've sold before,
we sell in Melbourne, we sell in Sydney, we sell a bit in WA in Queensland, but really not a lot.
Sure.
And we sell and we export to the US, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Denmark.
Oh, wow.
And Japan, of course. I reckon that's
busy enough.
Yeah, that's busy enough. And we don't expand our exports because we don't have enough wine. And we ideally would, on one hand, would like to sell as much, like everything here, because environment.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the world we live in is mobile, and we like not only drinking wine from here, but also looking at like expanding our horizons, drinking your French wine and American wine, Italian wine, you name it, and Japanese wine. And so we'd like to look after, we wish others the same things we wish to ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's great. So, wow, what a journey. So you've got. So what's next? You opening a restaurant here and putting a rooftop bar in?
Retiring. Next time, retiring.
Right.
I've been talking about retirement for a while. I'm not retiring from winemaking any soon. I'm not looking at retiring from the institute any soon. But we need to get creative and work a bit less, because at the moment it's been on average 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
And we'll have to become somehow more efficient. We'll find ways to do it. I have little doubt about it. But yeah, it'll take some thinking and planning and troubleshooting. In terms of other projects, well, ideally would make a little bit more wine. So now we would be roughly around the 20-ton mark, and we'll probably want to go closer to 25 or 30, just so we can make a little bit more wine, so we don't sell out like overnight, because there is so many people would like to look after, and every time we find ourselves with like quite a few people that we just don't have wine for, and we would really like to look after them. And it's I mean, heartbreaking is a big word, but it's sort of that, because they're really, really nice people we really enjoy working with. So not being able to look after everyone is kind of sad.
It is, yeah.
So we ideally would be making 25, 30 tons. In terms of growing grapes, at the moment we're undecided. I like ideologically I would like to be growing grapes. In terms of time management, at the moment it's just out of the question. I would have to quit my job at the institute, and I think my current position there serves a lot of interests that are important to us. We live in a very divided world, and without going into politics, we can look at politics of wine. There is a lot of division going on, whether it's natural, not natural, how much natural, red, white, McLaren Vale versus Barossa, you name it.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like that. When we look at a spectrum of winemaking, I'm not even talking about more or less natural. I'm talking about natural versus conventional, but small scale. It's still very similar to what we do. So someone might be using a few techniques that we choose not to. But it's still not that different. They still don't make, they don't bake bread or orange juice.
Sure.
It's still wine. There is so much in common between what we do. So all that division, it's something I'm not enjoying.
I always found that interesting. Like, it's such a broad church, everyone is welcome. and everyone can learn from everyone, from the smallest winery to the biggest winery. They've all got something that someone else can learn from. And I think
to an extent, I can only speak for myself, but what I've learned is that I was 10 years ago, I was like a sponge. I would pick up everything and anything. And now it's not that, sometimes I have those light bulb moments when I go like, oh, that's pretty cool how you did it. I could certainly, add it to my arsenal of tricks, winemaking. But more commonly, it would be like, I'm really not that interested in that area.
Sure.
Like, I kind of know what I want to do. And I'm happy to learn, and I'm not dissing anything, but I also know what I don't want to know.
I understand that, I think my point was more, a bigger winery might be doing something you don't agree with, but the way that they might do that process or something, be like, I see how that's done, and you can relate it back. Do
you have an example?
I'm trying to think of an example. So one would be, so I was at a winery where they would use this product that was touted. I was working for a bigger winery at the time. And there's this packet of stuff that you'd add to a white wine to reduce, it was a fining agent, to reduce the bitterness in a wine. And it would get the small chain stuff. And that was, they were saying it was actually a tannin. Like we're giving you a tannin to put in, and that would bind with this tannin and then drop it out. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, and didn't want to use it, but, learnt about it. And then when we were making a Sauv Blanc, it was like, oh, that's interesting. So what if we were to get our grapes and dry out a portion of them so that we could sort of create that tannin, then add that back through the wine, then that would help bind that up and drop that out and get rid of the bitterness. And it was like, oh, well, let's give that a go. So it wasn't sort of a direct learning, but like unless I was exposed to that.
Just an idea.
Yeah, exposed to that idea from that company.
Something that drove your thought process. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it certainly exists. And I wasn't saying it doesn't exist. I was saying it's becoming rarer than it used to be.
Exactly, because when you start, you're like, I like it. I'll grab that, and you're learning, and then you sort of forge the path that you want to go down. And a lot of things don't. You don't really want to know about the microoxygenation and the whatever it might be, the right oak chips to use with that one to get this flavour profile. It's like, okay, cool. I don't need to know that, but no, I completely understand.
So speaking of, going back to division, which I don't appreciate, we were talking about my role at the Institute. I see that role as well as almost like a mission, because I'm in the privileged position of probably being the only wine scientist in the world who makes natural wine, and certainly exposed to this world. And I know for sure that many of my colleagues who wouldn't even hear about natural wine would just treat it as, a bunch of hippies who have no idea what they're doing, giving it another thought and thinking, hang on, it's not that black and white. And I don't, I'm pretty sure they still most of them still don't like drinking natural wine. They still disagree with a few things, but at least they know it's not necessarily driven by mad people, and that's a start. And the same thing with wine research. I'd like to think, and I know for a certain to an extent, that's the situation that I create some kind of
like a bridge
between two words that otherwise would have nothing in common. I also gave a lecture to Adelaide Uni students like a month ago about natural wine. They were doing a sensory class, and I got invited by the lecturer because the Adelaide Uni decided that the students need to be exposed to more than one way of thinking, even if it's like a guest lecture. And I was delighted to run that lecture with the students. And I invited Gareth from Jelly Folk over, and between the two of us, we covered pretty much all we could in 2 hours.
Wow.
And it really felt like there were quite a few people who were, there were some people who really didn't give a shit. But there were quite a few, and that's not surprising, and there's nothing wrong with it. But there were more people than I thought that looked genuinely interested. And I was like, well, that's awesome.
That's all right. A few more in the world.
So, yeah, that was great. And that was another useful thing of being in a position of being a wine scientist, because I was there talking to them about natural wine, and I was welcoming. So we welcome questions on any level. If they want to talk to us about the rationale behind it, we could do that, and we could, to an extent, provide. We never got a question, but we could provide references to why,
sure,
and how we get away with what we get away with. So. Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Is there so being a bridge, does anything flow back the other way? So anything from the Institute that you would learn, or any, I'm trying to think of the right word. So anything from your work at the Institute, I know that you're exposing them to a world that's natural. Is there anything from their world that comes back the other way?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And funnily enough, not exactly related to what I do. Although that's what I do is applicable to any winemaker, really, because we're talking about winemaking techniques and how long you leave things on skins and how much residual CO2 you end up with, and so on and so on. But a very interesting finding was made recently when our biology team, microbiology team, were exploring wild ferments. And it's an ongoing process, it's a long-term project, quite a few years. So they've been collecting samples from wild ferments from around the country, and they were sequencing. So it's metagenomics kind of thing.
Sure.
So they're using heavy artillery genomic tools, and their findings were astonishing. But the biggest one, really, there were many very interesting things about it, but the biggest one was that wild ferment is a thing. Now, your first response would be, of course it's a thing, but there used to be the prevailing notion that you get a resident yeast in your shed and that ferments everything. And then people would say, well, there is no such thing as a wild ferment. It's all fermented by the same. You don't inoculate it physically, but it inoculates itself, and all of your ferments are carried out by the same yeast.
The one that ends up controlling the ferment at the end and then populates your shed.
Yeah. And then everything's supposedly fermented with that. Well, that's not true.
Really? Breaking news.
That was breaking news for me. So they were... Well, that kind of notion was based on the fact that all ferments start with all sorts of yeast and finished by Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
Yeah, that's what we're all taught. Yeah, Clockera comes in.
Well, that is still true.
Right.
But there is lots of different strains of cerevisiae, endless list.
If you look at the yeast catalogue, there's so many.
And they're only the ones that made it to the catalogue.
Yeah.
We're talking about, I don't know, I'm not a microbiologist, but at least thousands, and probably it could be millions of different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So based on that, someone decided that because there was some Saccharomyces cerevisiae used, cultured in that shed, probably PDM, EC3.18.
Yep.
That,
that's what we're taught as well. Yeah.
Half the wine in this country is made with that yeast.
Yeah.
So someone said, that's probably our resident. That's what it's fermented. They didn't have the tools to tell the difference, or they couldn't be bothered determining whether all of the ferments are in fact finished by EC3.18 PDM, or it was another strain of Saccharomyces that just happened to be there. Now, they're all finished with by Saccharomyces, but what this research found, every single ferment, if it's a wild ferment, it's finished by a different strain. Even if you have two separate ferments, that are let go wild, like, not a yeast, in a winery that uses EC118 in every single other ferment.
Really?
And they're still finished by Saccharomyces, neither of them would be EC118.
Wow. When did this come out? Is it
when?
Yeah.
Well, the finding was made a couple of years ago. In terms of whether it was published, I'm sure portions of that would be published. Otherwise, I'd probably I wouldn't be supposed to talk about it.
Right.
But
on the wrong magazine.
No, it's been published. Or at least portions of it, and the project is all going. There will be a lot more publications coming out of it.
Great,
and many of them will be like super exciting.
Yeah, well, the bridge is certainly flowing the other way. That's good. It's a good feeling that it's just
Absolutely,
yeah.
And I provided some samples, so they've been using our samples for like 3 years in a row now. So they're also looking at the same vineyard year after year. And trying to see where the yeast come from, whether it's the vineyard or is it not the vineyard, if they can trace similarities between two different vintages from the same vineyard. And there certainly are some, but only to an extent, of course, because there's yeast in the vineyard. There's also yeast everywhere else.
Yes, of course. We're breathing it in.
Yeah.
So the study is to see if wine from the same vineyard is, or we say vineyard in Western Australia and you say vineyard in South Australia.
I can't even tell the difference.
Oh, so vineyard is what we say, and vineyard. So the last part of the word is quicker here.
All right, yeah. I never noticed that.
I think, my friends would probably say that the last part of the word is slower in Western Australia.
Yeah.
So we're vineyard. But what they're testing is to see if the same yeast, the same strain of Cerevisiae is finishing the ferment if you're getting from the same vineyard. Is that what the study is?
It's not necessarily the case because there'll be lots of different strains of Cerevisia in the same vineyard, and every time there would be a different strain finishing the ferment. Not only that, Cerevisia is hardly present in grapes.
Right.
If there is a broken skin, so like bird pecked, there would be acetic acid, Acetobacter and Cerevisiae.
Yeah.
But on the outside, on the skins, there is hardly any Cerevisiae. So in many cases, the Cerevisia wouldn't be coming. Well, now I'm speculating. It's not published and it's certainly not official. But by the looks of it, Cerevisia doesn't come from the vineyard that much. It's probably to generalize or simplify. Let's say it comes from the air. But what makes wild ferment so interesting is the other yeast that start the ferment and throw all those different characters. Yep. And Cerevisia, it will contribute to the profile of the wine, but it will mainly do the job in converting sugar into alcohol.
Right. So it's the fast starters that are on the outside of the grape skin that get going first. There's there's Clockera. I remember.
Oh, there's heaps.
There's like
heaps of different species and genii really. Yeah, so many of them are non-Sacs, non-Saccharomyces.
Non-Sacs. There we go. Inside. That's how we go. Non-Sacs. I like it. Yeah, I went to school so long ago. I think we learned 3 other things that weren't Cerevisiae potentially, and that weren't spoilage yeast as well.
Yeah.
Schizo,
Saccharomyces pombe and Hanseniospora and some Uvarum. I mean, again, I'm not a microbiologist, I can bring up a few names from my memory, and they were all considered spoilage yeast, and of course bread. But now they're looking more and more of simulating wild ferments. Those who can't, too much control freaks to let a wild ferment happen, they still want to simulate it, so they check a few different strains. And yeast companies will come up with those mixes.
I'm pretty sure I've seen one that says wild yeast you can buy in a packet.
Yeah. Whereas we just do it, packetless.
Yeah, that's right. It's like free range, but in a cage. Yeah. It doesn't quite fly. Oh, that's great, mate. Well, thanks. Anything else you want to add before we sign off and crack another beer? I could probably talk for hours.
I'm happy to, answer anything. I do believe in freedom of information, and that doesn't only apply to this podcast. That applies to anyone who I really welcome anyone to, get in touch with us and ask questions in terms of when it comes to one thing is transparency. We really believe in transparency, but another one is freedom of information. We don't own any knowledge that we possess, because that's based on someone else's experience and knowledge that we learned. We didn't come up with anything really.
Sure.
And if we did, come up with some tiny bits, we're more than happy to share it because we still don't own it. I've been contacted by a large winemaking company. When I say large, it's a large one. And they were inquiring how to make PetNat.
Wow, yep.
And it was probably my status as a wine scientist then, rather than as a winemaker, that they found, sort of reliable.
Sure.
Anyway, they got in touch and they said, how do you make PetNat? I was like, sure, that's how we do it. More than happy to share the knowledge. If that's what you want to do, go for it.
Great.
That's fine. I mean, I have absolutely no problem with that.
No, we're the same. In fact, it's funny you say that, because I got a call from a very big wine company only 2 days ago. I don't even know what today is.
Friday.
So it was yesterday. And they were asking about knowledge for more vineyard stuff, so, under vine control of weeds. So we have a couple of different machines. This Caffini under vine high pressure water jet that uses rainwater, just cold. Jets down 1,000 psi. It smashes kike and cooch and all this stuff. And with Evo from Sea Vintners, we share this machine called a Tornado that Fisher make, and both of those machines are the first ones in Australia. And recently, Evo, took his tractor and went to another big wine company and did 2 hectares of their block because they're looking to convert to organic. And it's like we're the same. I think it should all be shared. And even just talking to you today, just learning stuff that I thought I knew and then I don't, and then it's like, and the sulfur thing, and even talking to Tom earlier, I think it's all got to be out there and transparent, and it's just going to improve everything.
Absolutely. And especially when it comes to stuff like organic, because if it's not even, I hope it's not if, it's probably when bigger players go entirely organic, that everyone's going to benefit from it just because of the ecology side of it. And I know that many big players are considering or actively going for it. I'm pretty sure Angovs are pretty big on organic, and they don't look at certification. They just look at practices, and they just see the benefit in it.
I think that's where it starts, is they get certified to meet a market demand. And then,
there is no market demand for them because they're not certified. They can't make those claims.
No, Angovs is.
Are they?
Yeah, they're the biggest certified wine producer in Australia.
All right.
Yeah, they just announced the last, because we're certified as well, so I guess we get the certified news.
Yeah.
I think their last block that they own is now under certification, so they'll be 100%. Vas Felix in Western Australia has announced they're going that way, so that'll be 320 hectares. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're all going for it, which is great.
Absolutely.
Now, you can only think it's been informed, obviously market, etc., but by the work that you're doing and have done and continue to.
Oh, it's probably the right thing to do on so many levels. Like, it'll probably benefit your sales, but on top of that, it's good for everyone anyway.
Yeah.
And it's probably, in the long run, if you set it up right, it's also cheaper to manage.
Exactly.
Hopefully, one day. I know it's not always cheaper, and I know it can be like...
But it's so much easier now to do it. Like, as more come on, the supply companies... and
it becomes more available.
Yeah, I mean, you can... This sort of goes against it, but you can be... I think pretty much organic by doing exactly the same as you've always done. You just swap the chemicals out that you're using in your tank. There's things you can use under vine. That sort of goes against it, the spirit of it.
Yeah.
But you can certainly do it. Yeah.
For sure.
Cool, man. All right. Well, wrap it up.
Rock and roll.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
All right. I'll see you very soon when we turn this thing off.
I'm looking forward to it.
What a great guy. Thanks, Alex, for that, and thanks everyone for listening. Once again, show notes and transcripts will be available at realwinepeople.com. Have a great January, and we'll be speaking soon. Cheers. Bye.